Now, the first thing we want to figure out is what we're going to build our frame out of. And in this particular case, I'm thinking this aromatic cedar would really look good with this picture because it has so much little red in there. It has these little red brush strokes, and then there's the flesh tones, and that should really bring it out. And by the way, if you're ever wondering how to tell what a wood's going to look like when you finish it, just kind of dampen it up a little bit. That'll give you an idea of how it's going to look when you're done. Now, this aromatic cedar you get in the closet section at Lowe's or Home Depot. Probably your mom and pa stores have it too. It makes your closet smell real good. Comes in tongue and groove kind of stock. Now our picture here looks like it's about 15 by 20, and so what I want to do is I want to incorporate that a little bit of that white, and I'm going to be using a matte with it as well. So in my planning here, I have to get my frame big enough to hold that picture and allow for the matte and a little bit of that white to show. Now, I happen to have a deathly allergy to redwood sawdust, and this aromatic cedar falls into that category, so I'm aware of my respirator. Now, first thing I always like to do is trim off the tongue and the groove. Then once I have that taken care of, I'll come back and I'm going to cut me some 2-inch strips. That will be for the face of the frame, and then we're also going to come back and cut some 1.5-inch strips, which will double up and use for the back of the frame, which sort of forms the framework for everything that it slide down into. Let's take the 2-incher, and we want to take the good side of the 2-incher, turn it over so that it's facing down, and then what we're going to do, join those two pieces together after I have glued them. Now, I like to brad nail the pieces together. You don't have to do that. You could just glue them and put some weight on it, and that will work just fine. But the nice thing about brad nails is it just sort of expedites the process and, kind of gets you moving a little quicker. The disadvantage is that you could end up putting a brad nail where you're later going to want to drill a hole. Now, that's not really a death sentence, which I'll show you later on. But, if you wanted to avoid that, you just glue the two pieces together, put some weight on it. Now, the thing is, I'm actually going to take 2 of the 1.5-inch strips and glue them on top of each other. That will then give me 1/2 inch worth of thickness to work with, which is where the glass, the mat, the picture, and the back will go. So once we have our strips made with the 2 strips glued onto the back there, we're just going to want to let them set for a while, although, because I put brad nails in them, you probably don't actually have to do this, but I like to use cinder blocks. Now, I consider cinder blocks to be one of the handiest tools in the shop because we can use it like we do now as a weight. They're heavy, but they're also square, and so if you need to glue some things together at right angles, they come in real handy to help you position things. And they also have that hole in it so that you can easily clamp things together. Now, when it comes to the 45-degree angle, if you're doing a mitered picture frame, you can't be off. It has to be 45 degrees. A slight variation, and it is going to show. Now, you may be wondering, well, Ken, why aren't you using your table saw? And the answer is, I don't have a table saw at the moment. My table saw broke, and the only saw I could find during this pandemic was a bench saw. And I don't want to go through the trouble of trying to set my bench saw up to cut a nice, clean 45-degree angle. And again, 1/2 degree is too much to be off. So instead, I'm going to use this cheap little miter block. And it's pretty self-explanatory how these things work if you never have. And by the way, hand tools are not a bad thing. Sometimes hand tools are really your best way to go. when you need to get something done quickly. And because I'm only making 2 frames, I think that's going to work out pretty good for me here. Now, first we're going to cut off one of these things, and then I'm going to measure it, insert a stop so that I can then cut the rest of them. And we're going to do the lengths first, and then I'm going to do the width of the frame. It's pretty straightforward. You're basically going to need 4 miters per frame. And, there you go. There's one piece. Now I want to show you a little trick I have for making a miter joint considerably stronger. And by the way, this is something that works really good when you are trying to re-glue something. Because once you've glued something and say it broke, say a leg broke off a table or something, and you try to glue it back on, it's not going to be as strong because there's hardened glue down in those pores. Now, this is a way to get around that, is you take a little bit on a drill, a small bit, and you drill holes in both of the faces, and you're really just dimpling it. You're not drilling those deep at all. They're just little tiny holes in there. And in this particular case, I'm actually going to line up, I measured it so that we're lining up those holes. When we put them together, there will be holes opposite one another, which forms something of a pedestal that traverses across the joint. Now, in addition to doing that, I'm really just going to kind of randomly stick a whole bunch of holes on all of those pieces. But before I do that, I'm going to mark where the face of the frame is, because I don't want to accidentally put a hole right there, because that would show. So I'm going to avoid where I'm marking right there, which is really the 2 faces of the frame. And then we just drill a whole bunch of holes all over the place, and you can get as crazy as you want with it. It doesn't take a whole lot, but as you can imagine, this is going to add a lot to the strength of your miter. What I've done here is I've sort of jury-rigged a jig for my frame. This is an old table saw I keep around here because I like the flat surface. This flat surface comes in useful for a lot of things, but particularly gluing things together, which I have a lot of that to do in my shop. So I've just sort of rigged this piece right here that everything butts up against, and we have this. There's weight over here that is holding this side in. Then I'll use clamps to kind of pull everything together. This piece here is clamped down so that in effect I know this is a right angle right here. So that's going to be my starting point. And you see we got our little holes in the joint. I have reason to believe that makes the joint a lot stronger, as I told you before. I'll load that baby up with glue, and this is going to shove glue into those other holes that are right in here. There's one. And we'll do the same thing over here. Now there's something else I'm going to do here too to strengthen these miters. Miters are kind of my preferred joint, I guess I would say. There's other ways to do these frames. Now, as you can see, we're pretty well locked up. Oh, I see the supervisor is coming. Look out, look out. Yep, supervisor's got to check it out, make sure everything is just right. Mow, mow. Excuse me, excuse me. Excuse me, I have a little something to do here. I'll go this way with it. Now, I'm not going real tight, just kind of a little bit of light pressure to pull those 2 joints together, as you would be able to see if the supervisor wasn't right in the way. Yeesh. Cat. She's not even my cat, she's the barn cat. Yeah, you're right in the way. Where you're supposed to be, huh? And that's it. Basically, we have everything cinched up and they look pretty good. I'll let her dry. I'm going to show you how to use a dowel rod to reinforce this miter. And what I'm going to use is a 3/4 inch dowel rod. So of course I have a 3/4 inch Forstner here. And what I want to do, I'm going to do two things. The first one, which is very important to not forget, is to set the height so that it does not drill all the way through the frame. This is the face of the frame, and so we want to go down to just before it goes through. It's got that little point on it. That looks about right, so I need to fix that in place. So the first thing we do is set the depth, and then the next thing we do is center it. And that's pretty close. It doesn't have to be exact, but that's pretty close. So then I'm going to lock my fence, my little homemade fence here down with clamp. Check it again. Looks about right. About right. Now we're ready. So I want to dig that brad nail out before I drill, because otherwise it'll wreak havoc on my bit. So I had to do a little digging out there with the chisel and diagonals to get it out, but I got it out. Now here's the dowel rod that I have, and it's, of course, if you do much of this kind of thing at all, one of the first things you begin to figure out is this whole proposition of clearance. And it looks to me like that's okay. Sometimes when you drill a 3/4 inch hole for a 3/4 inch shaft, it isn't going to work because either the hole needs to be slightly larger or the shaft needs to be slightly smaller. This is a very, very common problem in woodworking and other disciplines. In this particular case, it looks like I'm all right. So okay, I've made a bunch of wooden nickels, and the way I made this little channel here was to tilt the blade 45 degrees on my table saw, and then I just ran the whole rod in about that far and then back out, just in all four places, I guess, and that's going to allow the glue to ooze up around the sides. That's what's important about it, because glue is a liquid. So that glue down there, if I tried to push it down in and it had no way to get up around the sides, then that could be a problem. You have a hydraulic sort of a problem there. So let's just do this. I don't know how precise my measurement was, and we might have a little sticking out. If we do, I'll have to sand it down, but you can see how that glue just sort of oozed out the side. Now I'm going to let this frame really dry. I'm just going to let it dry all night, I think. Before I do any more drilling, I actually have several other holes I have to drill. One of them's kind of a special way I do it, so that you can hang the frame from a nail or screw, or you can actually with a dowel rod use it to set it up, set the frame up. I'll show you how that works when we get there tomorrow. what that does for us, if you just think about it a second, is we just added a whole bunch of surface area to our joint. Additionally, we added kind of a different grain pattern as well, so now we glued that straight down to what really amounts to a face grain, not an end grain. So now we have end grain, side grain, every kind of grain there is, and we've increased the surface area. And that's why this comes out being so much stronger. And as it turns out, it is really a lot stronger. I get this thing dried, I could throw it, drop it on the floor, and it won't break one of those joints. It's pretty cool. Now with picture frames, you do have this problem of securing everything into the frame, and when you think about it, that's quite a bit. You have the plexi or glass, whatever you use, whatever you're going to do in the way of a mat. You have the picture, you have the backing, and the way I'm going to do it is with strips that run across the back, and they will be shoved into place with these dowel pins. So I've taken one and made one strip, although I have 4 to do because there's 2 frames. What I want to do is make sure the holes are the same distance apart, which of course is pretty easy to do. Now what I've done here is I have my bench all set up, and my little homemade fence there has been securely clamped in place. So one of these pieces has already been drilled so that the distance between the holes will span the frame. Now the whole key here is to make sure that the holes end up being the same distance apart regardless of which strip it's on. And you can see the key is pretty simple. All you really have to do is make sure, stick a dowel in there just to make sure that the next hole is going to be located at the same distance. And then we do all the holes in however many pieces you have. In my case, since I'm doing 2 frames, there are 4 of them that I need to do this with. Now, as I mentioned before, you can get a lot of stuff in one of these frames. You have basically the glass. You can have a mat that goes in there. You have whatever your painting is. In this case, it's just paper, and then generally you put a back of some kind. I'm using corrugated plastic there, which is kind of an expensive way to do it, but I just happen to have some. You could also just use cardboard or masonite. Now, the point, though, is that there's quite a bit of weight there, so that's why I'm being a little bit elaborate about this. And as you can see, I'm going to locate my devices here at about 7 inches. And the key here is that we want to get the holes pretty well about the same amount on either side. And once I've figured out where that is, then we're going to mark where we're going to drill those holes. Fairly simple proposition. And because we know that those strips, the holes are exactly the same distance apart, it doesn't matter which one I use. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to round these ends of these things a little bit, which I can do, and I think most of us know you take a coarse sandpaper, and it doesn't take much to round a soft wood with coarse sandpaper is pretty good at removing stock. So this is one way to do it. Now I'm too lazy to do them all that way, so what I'm going to do is stick a little dowel pin in here and take it over to the belt sander, and a couple swift moves will have all of those corners knocked off. Now before I go to the drill press, I also want to locate a hole in each of these pieces right in the center, which of course we do by picking a dimension that's roughly out in the middle. In that case it was about 11.5, and that will be the center line. Now it's kind of important to be somewhat precise about this, get it in the center so that if you do end up hanging this on a wall somewhere, it doesn't cant to one side or the other. I put one in each piece just because You might want to use the frame for something other than the specific case that I'm building it for. Now, the most important aspect of drilling all these holes, as you might suspect, is let's make sure we don't drill all the way through the frame. So you have to get the depth stop set on your drill press. And you want to go right up to the face, but not through it, of course. Now, these 1/4-inch holes, this is what our dowel pin is going to slide down into. We have already marked. And so let's drill those all the way around. And then I'm going to want to check, make sure everything's right. I mean, if there was a problem, we could re-drill the holes a little further toward the center or whatever. But as you can see, this looks pretty good. So that kind of backing strap is going to fit just right. Now those dowels, what we're going to do is glue them into the strap and then cut off the excess that's sticking up there. And that'll give us our finished strap. Now, because we want our frame to set flush against the wall, we need this to recess down about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm pretty sure I can just use my 3/4 inch Forstner bit to drill out a little recessed portion on each of those holes. We're not going to go as deep as we did with the 1/4 inch. So once I have my depth set for my 3/4 inch, you see what I'm going to do is just kind of drill out something of a slot, if you will. You kind of have to nip off that tip there in order to make this work correctly. And then, do all your holes all the way around. The depth of that bit, of course, is really only the thickness of that strap. So it doesn't go as deep as the 1/4 inch hole. And now we have pretty much a slot for that strap to fit into. And that looks pretty good. Now when I drilled these holes, these 4 center holes that the frame will hang from, or that we'll put a dowel in, I put a little piece of wood in there to just kind of make sure they were drilled at an angle. I checked it with a piece of scrap wood and a dowel rod to make sure I liked the angle that it would set at. Now these oak dowels are sticking up a little too high. I'll take those down with my belt sander, which is probably okay, because even if I kind of get into the cedar a little bit, it won't hurt anything since it's on the back of the frame. Now the front of the frame, I'll just use my finishing sander, sand it up, and those edges I'll probably do on the belt sander, and then we should be ready to finish. Now you already know how to sand and finish, so I'm not going to demonstrate that, but I did want to show you the difference between a finished frame and an unfinished frame. Now I happen to know that Brad's wife Brenda is allergic to cedar, therefore you need to seal up the frame on not only the front of the frame but also the back of the frame. So I've finished both sides, really everything, so that there's no cedar aroma coming out into the room. Whereas in the unfinished frame, you would have that, which might be a desirable quality to people that are not allergic to cedar. Now the other woodworking tip I have for you is this. Most of us hate the smell of finish, and the way you dissipate that is to find a cardboard box that, in this case, the frame would fit down into, and then open up a little box of baking soda, put that in there with it, and that'll dissipate the smell for you. Well, there's your picture frame videos. Hope that gets you going.